Three, two, one. Here we are again. Just really troubled about what's going on. That is on campuses. It seems like everywhere. I mean, since Columbine and the rest of these shootings, and now Parkland. I mean, this is just overwhelming to say the least. And so, you know, we do send our condolences, our care, our hearts, that is, to those who are suffering tonight. I'm hoping that we can see some change over the next few days, that is, in our government concerning our positions concerning guns and security. And so, with that said, we're going to get right into the show. But I wanted to give Daryl a chance just to say a few words. Hello, Daryl. We're bringing you in via phone, if you will.
Yes, hello, good evening. What you were just talking about, I think is very important that we're hearing about the mental health issue. I don't know how deep anyone's willing to go there, but when I see a 17-year-old kid with an assault rifle, I
Right.
don't understand that in the first place. But when I see what the kids are, quote, playing these days, you walk into a room and they're killing as many as they can kill on video. And it's very graphic, very good graphics. And it's like, I don't know, in some sense, I think it's like once the dog gets in the chicken yard, and tastes the blood, it ruins him. And I just wonder how much of this is actually affecting the health of our youth. Uh, you know, uh, it just seems to me like a bad combination. And um, as far as solutions, I don't know. We need to find one. That's for sure.
I agree. I have my thoughts on it. I wanted to hold up for a few days before I shared them simply because I think typically we have been known as a people who overreach a bit. We need to find a sense of balance. In other words, one of the things that I'm proud of, that is in science, these big ships, these Carnival cruisers that people go on cruises on, they're so tall and it's very easy for the wind to get up and, almost use that ship almost like a sail. How do they keep it from tipping over? Well, there's a science behind it. And so they find, a sense of balance by the way that they design it. And I think the same thing is true if we design, let's say, this civil experiment that we're going through. If we have a sense of balance in it, I think things will improve. But here's the thing that really is telling. There was a study that came out, and I was going to read some of that tonight, but I'm not. But it demonstrated that it's not just people on the right who become extremists, but it's people on the left who become extremists. And so both are potentially crazy, if you will. And we have in both parties in America, we have these notions or these narratives of againstness. And it has created a lot of fuel. And the fuel is mostly an us versus them mentality. And we hear this a lot in the protest. People are not so much about this and that, they are more about us versus them. And I don't think that any time that you have that kind of rhetoric, it's going to find a pathway forward, that is, when it comes to a nonviolent society, simply because people are always looking for a scapegoat. They're always looking for someone else to blame. And so in this case, I think that people need to become like, let's say, the narrative here at NCG. We are willing to accept people for who they are. We love people unconditionally. We accept people unconditionally. We don't necessarily agree with their philosophy, but we just love people. And we're not against people, but we may be somewhat against their philosophy, but that's a much different thing. And so we try to separate the difference between disagreeing with philosophy and disparaging the person. And what we hear in politics day in and day out, that is in the news media, people are disparaging Donald Trump or President Obama or George Bush or, and the list goes on and on and on. And so there is this movement of disparaging one another. And when people hear that, that's not hope. That doesn't encourage people who become mentally ill to find some answers. And I'm simply saying that if we created multiple pathways of hope, if we had a movement of compassionism, these people who are sick, they may try to get some real help. But if all they're hearing is just all of this against us, they don't have anywhere to go. And so at some point in this conversation, if you don't have a place for these troubled young people or troubled individuals who are psychologically off left and right, if you don't have a place for them to go when they do become like they are, that is to get help, I think that, things are going to go south. And so that is a major concern. But I would like to share my thoughts on a lot of this here in a few days. I'm going to send Diana a link, and she doesn't know this, but I'm going to send her a link just to join us audio-wise, not video-wise, because we're not doing any switching tonight. We're just talking, and I think that she would be a wonderful plus in the conversation. I see that she's actually here tonight. I tell you what, we're a big fan of her, are we not?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, just give me a minute. We're going to be very, very relaxed tonight. Some people don't like that because they feel like every time that you utter a word, it needs to be so powerful. And I'm really tired of the kind of shows in which you have to perform, every second of a show. I would rather be laid back and take time enough to drink some wine or some water or tea or whatever.
I want to jump through hoops, but I don't
Yeah.
have any hoops.
There you go. But I sent Diana a link, and hopefully she will join because I'd like to ask her some questions. I think she has a lot to offer the conversation. And so let's see if she pops up here in a minute. Let me send her a message here. Okay, we are just talking tonight. Yes, we have a perspective of truth, not truth itself. That's pretty simple. Someone asked me to watch the show that we did with Cy Ten Bruggencate and Eric Coven. Well, I watched the last hour simply to see what was said with Eric Coven. It was a wonderful conversation in my estimation. He didn't have a lot of answers. I think that I was able to give him enough love, enough understanding, enough questions to get him to rethink things, but unfortunately I don't think that he did. But at least I tried. And so let me see if Diana will jump in. There you go. Maybe she will. But tonight I wanted to talk about some things in the Bible, if we could, for a few minutes. And hopefully some of our viewers will be interested in the substance. They may get bored tonight. I'm tired. You're tired. We've been laboring in so many different areas. I mean, Rick's father-in-law, he's suffering so much tonight. I mean, my God. You're talking about a guy that's been through hell and probably won't make it through the night. My mother-in-law, hospice, been called in, and she's suffering much in every way. I mean, my goodness, this is tough to deal with. And when it comes to my mom with dementia and all of that, this is a tough time. However, I think I hear Diana. Hello, Diana.
Hi there.
How are we doing?
Am I on here?
Yes, I believe
Yes,
that you are.
the
We're not
mic's on.
switching to any video, so you don't have to worry about any of that. If
Oh,
that's
good.
good
I
or
just
bad,
woke
I
up.
don't
You don't
know.
want to see me right now.
But I love having you on the show. Daryl is an amazing person, and he loves you very much, and I do too. My wife does as well. And you're just one of these unique individuals who has a true sense of balance. I want to discuss something quickly before we get wrapped up in some of the things that I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to ask your opinion on this. And I'm going to go back and read something that I put on my Facebook page. Let me see where it's found. I said I've been having many conversations with atheists who claim that they live life without any form or kind of belief. And yes, I did ask them to put all religious notions to the side and attempt to explore whether belief of any kind was any value or any part of their life.
I remember you putting that up, and I think I answered some of it too, didn't I?
Right. So many people, not all, but a large number of atheists are claiming they live completely without belief. And even when I quoted from Stanford University philosophers, cognitive scientists, and all of that concerning belief, how we have beliefs consciously and unconsciously, subconsciously, and so on, they said that it was all word salad. What's happening within the atheist movement today that gets atheists who are trying to posture themselves as people of reason, and they're rejecting case studies and actually lots and lots of evidence? What say you?
I have to think that it's got to be political on their part. I think it was on my part too, because I've changed my stance over the last year or so to say that we would hold a belief. I'm thinking that some of us might be afraid that the fundamentalist would say that, oh, you do what we do. You have belief, you have faith too. The whole thing like this, where I've come to understand that in conversation with Ozzy, with Stephen, with you, that's not exactly what faith is. I mean, there's a certain aspect of what the fundamentalist will call faith that I don't call faith anymore, that I absolutely reject. But faith is something other than what a lot of us think it is. And I think they're afraid that, that it is what the religious want it to be, and they will be taken to mean that that is what it is, and are afraid to use the word. I mean, I'm still afraid to use the word in some places. So, did I make any sense at all?
Sure. Yeah, I can understand being a bit paranoid. That is, of using a term that the fundamentalists use over and over again. But I keep saying that fundamentalists typically abuse the language of theology so much so that I think that we would need to just run away from English altogether. and so
they're the great equivocators, I'll tell you that.
Right, I get that. And so, out of respect, I would like to see people returning to, just because you have a handful of people coming in who are abusing, let's say, a discipline. Theology is a discipline. However, there are a lot of people who are very undisciplined when it comes to theology. For instance, when I typically have atheists on the show, I can't name you one atheist that I've had who is actually disciplined, that is in the context of the read, that is the Bible. And so it really alarms me when I have people on, even R. Rob, and he's a good friend, love him to death, but he doesn't know a damn thing about the book of Genesis except for what the fundies are putting out. And so my question would be, if you're trying to advocate science, why would you want to only know what the fundies know instead of what people know who approach, let's say, the book of Bereshit in a scientific method, by scientific methodology? That doesn't make sense to me. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't understand why somebody would not want to study the texts. I mean, you don't have to believe in what's there, but it's really a whole lot of fun to dive into that and see what was going on in the heads of the people who invented that stuff.
Sure,
That's a very, very valid study, very
right,
valid
right.
way of study that, get into their mindsets. And it's a heck of a lot of fun too.
I was asked the other day, I was put on the spot, someone asked me to, what did some of these ancient authors mean by the word faith? And I said, well, just like people of today, when people say something, their usage is what we need to focus on. And so if I had 10 people in theism tell me what faith is, linguistically, I would have to do some work, that is, to examine what their intent was. And it's rare that people use the word faith in the same way. And this is something that should be a measured approach. That is, if we're all about science. And so here's my point. If we look at, let's say, the author of the book of Hebrews, there is a compelling argument that in chapter 11, the author was using faith in this sense. If we talk about the evidence hoped for, not the evidence that we actually possess, there was something called faith, and this was the manner in which we approach something that we were hoping for. In other words, if we're, some police officers, for example, they have a gut feeling about something. They just go with that gut feeling about something just to try to tease out something. They're in hopes that they will find X, Y, or Z. And in that journey, they find, oh, wow, I was wrong about this. And so they shift gears a bit. They work intuitively, and they're taught to work like that. And so in that particular discipline, there is a lot of things that are just, it's not so empirically based. And I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think in a sense I would.
It's like
I
a
don't know
police
if I'd
officer.
call it faith.
A police officer sometimes will look at someone, they will attempt to read someone's body language, not just listen to what they're saying, even though they're not trained to read body language, and they will, work with that. And so many times that's really, really off. A person's body language could be the result of what? Sugar levels being off. Body language
Yeah.
could be, you may have too much caffeine. If you're running a fever, the body language could say this or that. I mean, there are so many different things that one would have to understand in order to read that properly, correct? And so a scientist would approach it much different than these people who work in the field, but everyone doesn't have a chance to go and get a lot of linguistic training to do their job. And then when we say, oh, everyone needs to work completely without faith, we don't live in a world where everyone can be as trained in every discipline as what we would like to see. Would you agree with that?
Oh, let's see. I don't know that I would call the hunch that the officer is making, a matter of faith.
Okay.
But I would definitely call the trust that he has in his partner.
Okay, but
Faith.
what I'm saying is this. In the book of Hebrews, there is this venture set. In other words, faith is used in the context of venture. If you've read much in philosophy, you'll know what I'm talking about with
I
faith,
really
faith
haven't
venture
read much
sets.
philosophy at all.
Okay, but with faith venture sets, there is this, thing that happens doxastically. You're building belief upon belief, and you're really not dealing empirically with much, if anything at all. And so there's a big difference between epistemic issues and doxastic issues. And so I'm not going to get into a faith chat tonight. I'm just talking a little bit about this tonight. But in Hebrews, it appears that the author is saying, if you have a lot of doubt, then you have to have faith. In other words, if you don't know, this is an issue of faith. That seems to be what the writer is admitting to. But this person is simply saying, I've got a lot of hope. My hope is that we will have evidence at some point. And so there is a journey to evidence. Once you have evidence, you have reason or warrant to believe, correct?
Yeah, I can go with that.
And so
Definitely.
faith, in a sense, is that willingness to say, I'm in the dark on this. And so many people in science want to study what's already, in a sense, known. But those people who are exploring the unknown, they don't do it without just, putting it all out there. They're in hope. They have a hope that they will find some kind of evidence, and there's something that's working within them, cognitively speaking. And this is why Bob and I keep talking about a cognitive operation. And some of that's similar to the language that we find in the book of Hebrews, because these people were looking, they were searching. I think that most human beings are searching. And in that search, there's a heck of a lot of confidence that, we should be able to find something. They're working. And so when you read the context of, let's say, chapter 11, these people were, they were hoping for something. And sometimes, I like some linguists have made the argument, even philosophers have made the argument, that hope and faith in this context can be egalitaric, one and the same in the sense. So we have different usages of faith. We have Paul, he moves from faith to faith. In that context, he moves from one perspective to another. And certainly we have perspectives, don't we? We have perspectives of truth. And I claim that we have perspectives of truth, not truth itself. And so if my perspective is called a pistis in the ancient text, and it is. In other words, Paul admitted that he had a perspective of truth, and that his perspective of truth moved from A to B. He moved from perspective to perspective. I don't think there's anything wrong with remaining in flux. This is why I keep saying I'm committed to a process, not a conclusion. I'm not static. When we study Paul's theology through the lens of Greek, we get something much different than we see in English. We get Paul is in transition. He's not stuck in a static position concerning faith or truth. This guy is in flux. And many people say, look at all the contradictions. It's like saying, look at Einstein and all of his contradictions. If we look at the early, let's say, life of Einstein and study him all the way through, he's much like Chomsky. What Chomsky is saying today about generative grammar is so different than what he was saying, a couple of decades ago. And so you would think, this guy's a walking contradiction. No, he's not. He understands that scientists are committed to a process, not a conclusion. What they say today, it's going to change because we can falsify things, we can do these things, and blah, blah, blah. That's been true in many people's lives, and they understand that about their own journey. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree, yeah. As far as scientists go, I almost said we because I had the training I wanted to be in research, but unfortunately didn't make it, but I'll say they. They are working, they are having their job in order to disprove the things that are already known. I mean, we're not about proof. You really can't prove anything. You can have better and better indications that something is correct, but all you can do is disprove. So everything it's about is changing your mind, and how much we've changed our minds over the last few millennia.
Right. Many people are saying, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? The question would be, do we not have to have methodology to go along with evidence?
Methodology is key.
Right.
You've
So
got
if you
to
don't have a
be able-
methodology to tease something out, why would we even argue or even ask the question, where's your evidence of God, if we don't have a methodology?
I guess there it all depends what you mean by God.
Well, I'm simply saying we can't arbitrarily just come up with a definition because that's just making up cartoonish type things. I mean, without just making shit up, we've got to have a methodology to deal with somewhat of what we call reality because reality, we have perspectives of reality. Reality is a very hard thing to nail down. In one discipline, it's like, we're always constructing models of reality. That's exactly how the brain works. And so, Diana, see if you can go along with this. We have 10 people looking at the same event. You can ask 10 people about that event, and since all of them sensed that event, their brains, what they sensed, they had faith in, correct?
Yeah.
We all have faith in what we sense, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the thing that I need to get people to admit. Like Aaron Ra, when I said, he was here in the studio. I said, hey, what I sense, I have faith in, and he disagreed. He doesn't have
No,
faith in what he senses. That doesn't make any sense.
I've since learned the usage. I guess you'd call it the formal usage.
Sure.
When Ozzy, Stephen, myself, you were talking about that. Yeah, I get that usage of faith. I think that's
So,
let's try that again.
okay.
Perfectly
Now,
appropriate.
we have 10 people who witness an event, okay? You're there, I'm there, Daryl is there, okay? We're all there. We have faith in what we sensed. However, just like all of these children, and it's sad what took place in Parkland, I can't help but cry. I've been crying all afternoon when I watched some of these people say what happened. I just went into tears. I'm a crybaby, okay? That's who I am. But
I know the feeling.
here's the deal. What I sense, I have faith in, but my brain takes what I sense and my brain interprets it. And there's not a cognitive scientist on the planet that denies that. All of them say that my brain is constantly constructing and even reconstructing what I sensed.
Right.
Now, those are the explanations of the facts that we have today. Explanations of the facts are not the facts, they are just but explanations, correct? But
Yeah, definitely,
but in a
definitely.
sense, we take these explanations by a sense of faith. We trust them for right now, correct?
Yeah.
It's-
And then comes the, what do you want to call it, peer review? I saw
Correct.
something and someone was standing next to me and I said, hey, did you see what I just saw? And depending on that person's answer, then if they say, no, I didn't see that at all, then I've got to
Right.
rethink what I saw. But if they saw the same thing I did, then, okay, my perception was in large part correct.
Right. Okay, when it comes to Darwin's bulldog, and we know Huxley, Huxley was the bulldog. He was the bulldog. He was the guy who was, in a sense, who had faith in his explanation of evolution, correct?
I guess one would say that, yes.
Okay, so his explanation, that is, Darwin's explanation of the facts were not the facts themselves. That was just the explanation, correct? Now,
Oh,
the
yeah, that's
explanation
what a
of the
theory is.
facts, namely an evolutionary work, that's changed many, 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 many times. Now we're into modern synthesis, and now that's where we are. We still talk about Darwin. We're thankful for Darwin, but yet we don't disparage Darwin and we don't disparage Huxley because he had faith in an explanation. But did he not have trust or faith or confidence in that a bit?
I would say, yeah. This is why he committed it to print or
Right.
manuscript or whatever you want to call it.
So when he used agnosticism, he was trying to say, yes, I'm aware of its earlier usage. I don't know, but let's see if we can use it within scientific methodology, it would be better to suspend our judgment if we don't know. And that would be a good idea, correct?
For the most part, suspend judgment, yeah.
So,
There
in
may
other
be some-
words,
There may be some cases in which one needs to act without all the facts. I understand that. So I guess that's where really, drop something here. I guess that's where faith really comes in too, where you don't have
Right.
all the answers quite yet, and you've got to do something.
so
So you need to have faith in what you're about to do.
So if I suspend judgment, like an algebra teacher teaching A plus B equals C, I'm having faith that suspending judgment right now without, little Johnny says, oh, A is a goat. Little Susie says, no, A is not a goat. And the algebra teacher goes, oh my, Johnny could be right, little Susie could be right, but you guys have nothing to work with. I'm going to keep my mind wide open. I'm suspending judgment, but you guys could be right. So I believe that suspending judgment is the best position or disposition to have, correct?
Yeah, sure.
So if someone commits to goat or not goat, they have gone well beyond suspending judgment, correct?
Yeah, and then when they commit to goat, I'm going to ask them, why did you
Okay.
do that?
Right, why did you
You know,
do
what-
that?
what
Okay,
basis do you have?
if we can make this analogous to the great debate about God, let's think about it like this. It would be much easier to deal with A plus B equals C than to deal with the question of God. Now, look at it like
Orders
this.
of-
When people, think about this. If we have the question of God, not whether he exists or not, but the question of God. Existence is an issue that most theologians put to the side because they say that existence, number one, there's a problem with existence. And the problem with we don't know that existence is, number one, eternal. We don't know of anything that's everlasting or is infinite, infinite, that is in reality, and this is why infinite regress is a very good thought experiment. If you don't have anything analogous in reality as far as infinity, you only have that synthetically in mathematics, correct?
Oh, let's see, yeah.
One
I think
could
in
make the
mathematics,
argument-
Infinity is
Right,
the fact that you can always have more,
right.
but
And
there's
so,
really not that.
okay, so one could make the philosophical argument for a case of evidence. I'm not going to make this one, but some people do. Infinite regress. Doggone, we don't have infinity in reality, nothing analogous to that, and so we really don't have a true sense of infinity that we can really compare. So empirically, we don't have a model for that. So what we would have to admit that would imply, in a sense, a first cause, correct?
Oh, my.
The possibility of a first cause.
I guess there could be the possibility of a first cause.
In other words, just
I'm
picture it
the
as
one that has to
dominoes.
say
You
I don't know
keep-
when it comes to things like
okay,
that.
but if you keep knocking the dominoes down and you know that it doesn't keep going on and on and on and on and on, you're going to come down to either first cause or whatever you want to call it. And so I think that we get into these pissing games about what we want to call something. Now, whether we call something God, first cause, or whatever, that's a secondary point, isn't it? Because when we look at the explanation of the facts that we see throughout science is the explanation of what over time things change. We don't see the explanation of the origin of everything.
Well, no, we don't. And
True.
I'm
And so-
one that believes it's possible that we cannot. It may be beyond our capacity to observe.
Right. And so the facts that we deal with, the way that we interpret them today, we know that energy can't sustain itself. We don't have this perpetual motion machine, so it just can't last and last and last. So there are a lot of questions out there that would suggest there's something a little bit more greater, much greater than some flying spaghetti monster, correct? I mean,
Oh, my.
isn't it
Yeah, I guess
crazy
you could
that
say
we
that,
love to
yeah.
throw the flying spaghetti monster in there and just use it as a distraction piece in the sense that we say, let's just forget about all kinds of reasoning. Now, I'm not suggesting God. I'm simply saying that theologians, for the most part, don't believe that God exists because when it comes to ontological things, most of them take this position that if there is a God, he would have probably created existence and for this existence to evolve. And he may not have control over what happens. Hence, he cannot engage in all of the activity that people keep trying to call him down to. So many of us say, well, if there is an all-loving God and he's all-powerful and blah, 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 all these ifs, well, why didn't he stop the shooter? That is in Parkland. And so we get into these absurdities when it comes to the question of God because we always overreach. We've got these high expectations. If there is a God, he could be a God who simply created but doesn't have the power, correct? Or let's call it a different word. The first cause could have been something that doesn't have the power to engage in, stopping bullets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a sort of a deistic God, I guess.
Well, I don't know.
was in a,
See, I have a problem with deistic God as opposed to theistic God because that's just a play on which language that you want to work with. If we're working with Greek, we would use the word theos. If we're working with Latin, we would go with the deist notion. So I really don't get into, let's switch languages here. I mean, we're still dealing with the same issue. And I know a lot of people, very incompetent linguistically, they like to make a distinction simply because people are trying to use that in a sense like a shell game. And so my point is this. I don't know of anyone on the planet who has ever defined God well.
You've got that right.
Yeah, and so when we talk about God, what are we talking about? I don't know. And so when we ask people, do you believe in God? If we're smart, we know that we're asking a question that they can't answer, correct?
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned it on the place before. I really like what Neil Gaiman said in one of the debates in which Christopher Hitchens was involved. He put the question, when you are speaking of God, what do you mean? I have a feeling that when people talk about God, each of the participants in the discussion has an idea of her own, and they're all talking past each other. They're really not talking about the same thing. And that's where part of the disagreement comes from. I mean, they're all using the same word and assuming that the other person means the same thing they do, but they don't.
Let me ask you a simple question. If I walked into a high school room where people were, attempting to understand linguistics a bit, if I started asking them questions about linguistic raising, do you think that I would be
When
a
linguistic
kind
raising,
person? I beg your pardon?
Can I have that one again? I'm not sure if I got that.
Okay. If I ask someone about linguistic raising, which is not an easy thing to deal with, okay, because you're certainly dealing with something that's typically well above the heads of people who have just dabbled in it, okay? If I talk
It's
about
well over my
linguistic
head. I don't think
control
I've
and
ever heard that
raising
term
and
before.
lowering, this is probably well beyond people, let's say, in middle school and high school, okay?
Yeah.
Now, if I ask, let's say, a third grader, can you give me a bit of exposition on circumlocution? I mean, is that fair?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the third grader you're asking has no idea of what that is.
That's true. And see, this is my point. If I know someone doesn't know what it is, and if I have become let's say well read when it comes to the question of God, why would I disparage someone with a question like, where is your evidence of God? Or what is your, just questions about God? Because, I mean, those of us who are somewhat well read when it comes to the God question, we know that we haven't been able to define God well. And some people will say, oh, no, we've been able to define God well. He's the creator. That's a good definition. That's a cartoon definition. There's a difference between just making shit up and making the application and putting it to the term just to play your own game, that is of chess. We play chess all the time because we made up the rules. And this is what takes place with the term God. We just make up definitions, we apply it to God, and we think that it will stick on the wall. But in reality, we don't have a clue as how to approach the question. Would you agree with that?
Pretty much. Yeah. I've noticed that whenever people are pressed, or whenever a lot of people are pressed to give their idea of what they mean by God, when they go on about this is what my God wants you to do, they're not even trying to define God.
All
They're
right.
simply slapping that word on whatever their preferences or prejudices at the time are.
Okay. Now, we've been talking for 20 to 30 minutes. Let's go
Okay.
back to Darwin and Huxley. So this guy has maybe a bit of confidence in Darwin, correct?
Okay.
A bit of faith. And I would bet that his faith moved. In other words, I would bet that he would say, if explained or was talking to me, he said, I've been moving from faith to faith or from perspective to perspective simply because Darwin's extremely smart. The day that he started his work, he did not remain the same yesterday, today, and forever. He kept moving. And so this is the way that science is, and all scientists expect for things to continue to move. And so we're not bashing Chomsky for what he said 30 years ago. We're trying to pay attention to what he's saying today because he's very much a scientist, correct?
Yeah.
And
Now,
so,
there are things that Darwin said that can be verified. I mean, if I remember this correctly, when he wrote his Origin of Species in 1859, he said that there would be a half bird found. There was no evidence of a half bird at the time. But he said, if my theory is correct, we are going to find this. And sure enough, 2 years later, they did. It's called Archaeopteryx. And since then, many other examples have been found that further refine the notion. So Darwin had a pretty good idea of what he was talking about when he
sure,
was talking.
sure.
Now he was employing faith at the time. He said, "I have faith that this is going to be the case," and yeah, it did turn out to be.
So when people say, I want to encourage you to be an epistivist, why? If you're all about the age of reason, if you're trying to participate in the multiple kinds of methodologies in scientific theory and all of that, why would anyone encourage someone who's trying to get people involved in the sciences to do away with the notion of faith altogether?
Okay, yeah. Now the usage of the word epistivist, and I'm personally, I'm moving away from the use of that word. I've got to find a better word, but I think, let's say that I have faith that a lot of people are using that in the context of a certain misuse of faith that certain televangelists and others of that ilk employ, where they say that faith, or imply that faith is accepting something simply because I said you should. That's what I see, that's what these people are rejecting.
Okay, but the question is, why would not people be clear and say, wow, when we look at Billy Graham, he admitted, he said, I've been asked the question, why do all of these bad things happen if God is so good? And he said, I don't have an answer to this question. He said, I don't have anything that's even compelling just on a personal level. He said, I have nothing. And so he was very evangelical, but he wasn't a fundamentalist. The fundamentalist, a small fragment of the whole, they're making these crazy arguments. This is almost like saying, I'm going to take the position against these small pockets of people, like the Branch Davidians. Since David Koresh said X, Y, and Z, I'm taking a big stance against certain kinds of words that are used in theology. Isn't that a bit incompetent? Just because David Koresh misused and abused theology like he did, why would people who are wanting to be measured, wanting to say we are all about science, why would they entertain such an argument that even gave the Branch Davidians any oxygen in the room, if you will?
Yeah, I will. As far as that group, yeah, entertaining anything what I've heard out of them is totally silly.
It is. But isn't the
and
same thing
I
true with
think-
fundamentalists?
Say again?
Isn't the same thing true with fundamentalists?
Yeah, I have a feeling that these folks are not bothering to do the study. They are simply saying that this is what I don't like. You have to not like that as well as I don't like it, because I don't want to see it and we need it legislated out of existence. So you have to take this really flimsy reason I'm using for its abolition as fact because I'm telling you to.
Right,
And that's really, really bad. And they're trying to call that faith.
right.
And no, that's not faith at all. That's gullibility.
That's good. Well, I've been in so many atheist groups who have simply abandoned the notion of faith and belief itself. People were making arguments against belief. I mean, I said, put all religious notions to the side. You don't have a belief at all. And so when it comes to knowledge, I mean, tell me a philosopher that
beliefs.
doesn't, somewhat use the word belief when it comes to knowledge.
I think we all have beliefs.
Yeah, we do, but
belief
they,
is simply a-
okay, but my point is, these people have gone way, way, way overboard like the Branch Davidians, and these are
Yeah.
atheists. That's what concerns me. Why are the ones in the age of reason, in this ism of reason, why are they, so extreme? I mean, they have become extremists. They're denying science. I mean, I even quoted Richard Dawkins when he talks about scientific belief, using it within the context of methodology. And when I even quoted that, they still denied belief. And Richard Dawkins is one of their heroes. And so I don't get why, it reminds me a lot of church. You get some heroes of the faith involved in preaching the gospel, and people just follow them blindly. And I find that's happening in atheism as well.
Yeah, they have this tendency to follow because they like what they're hearing,
Right, and it has
whether or
nothing
not
to
it
do
has any
with
basis in
science.
fact.
Right, yeah, I agree with you. Well, this has been a good chat. I love your honesty about this simply because you're not afraid to change your mind. You're not afraid to concede a point. A lot of people I meet, they don't want to change. They don't want to remain in flux. They want to be committed to conclusions rather than a process. Why?
Well, I have a feeling that when you've got a public face, if you change your mind on some point, there's that possibility that your audience is going to say, wait a minute, you flip-flopped, you're not credible on anything. But in fact, by changing the mind for a good reason, that person is actually more credible than she would have been sticking to a particular point in the face of all evidence against it.
Okay, let's look at Noam Chomsky. He's one of the best minds on the planet. He's a scientist, regarded in the atheist community as above probably all. He changes his explanation of the facts about every 2 to 3 years, and no one's calling him loony or crazy or flip-flopping. They're simply saying this guy knows what he's doing. He's committed to science. That's what scientists do, and that's what people understand about science. This is not going to remain static, and that's the thing that I can't get. People of reason, people who advocate science, they get caught in a trap trying to articulate the advancement of science, but when they say something, they feel committed, almost like the Pope, almost like the bishops, almost like the apostles. We must stay consistent with the faith. We have to keep the faith, this same old faith. And Paul says, fuck that. I'm moving from this faith to something else. This one was messing my life up.
Yeah. What just came to my mind is on a certain Ms. Clinton, one of the things that people complained about with her was that she flip-flopped on the Iraqi invasion. And at first she supported it, and then she later said, no, I am not in support of this. Why should they castigate her for that if what she did was indeed change her mind on that subject? Says, you know what, I was wrong then, and here is why I think I was wrong. That's a ticket to credibility as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. I think that Hillary Clinton is multi-axial. She can see some things through this vantage point and that vantage point at the same time and admit that both are plausible. And so when it came to the Iraq War, this was the set of facts given. And yes, something was confirmed. But other facts came that would suggest, this may be confirmation bias here. If you hold on to this only, another set of facts might change what we need to be confirming or admitting to. She conceded the point and moved forward. I applaud her for that, and I applaud all politicians for that, but that's not what happens in politics. We call these people flip-floppers, but in fact, this is what we need, that is, in all people. True?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have that ability to always reevaluate your positions and be willing to change those positions if you need to.
Right. Excellent point. Daryl, what say you about Diana? I mean, it sounds like she's just finely tuned and brilliant in these discussions. What's going on with her?
Yeah, I'm enjoying listening to her. It's good hearing you, Diana.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I just woke up from a nap, so
Well, you're doing really
forgive me
good.
if I didn't make much sense, but
You must have had a good nap. You're doing good.
thank you.
Now, I've got a couple of questions for both of you guys, both of you. I was asked some questions about the book of Revelation the other day, and I said, this book of Revelation, It's the product. And I like the book, by the way. I don't like the theology, but I like the fact of what it stands for. It stands for someone who did not know Greek well, but wrote, in a sense, in a panicked type situation. In other words, if your first language is, let's say, Aramaic or Hebrew, and you got a chance to learn a bit of Koine, and then you wanted to write to people who did speak Koine, and you did your best, and you thought that things were coming to this climax, if you will, and you were frightened, you would write in this particular manner. And this is a very, very clumsy read. It's a mess in Greek, but it demonstrates, a bit of humanity. And I think that people do write like that when they are put under a lot of pressure, especially when they're not writing in their native tongue. And so, why do people want to disparage the book of Revelation so much when they don't know much about it, Diana and Daryl?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see where you're talking about the stress because, well, it's been a very long time since I've read Revelations, I think about 40 years. But what I remember of it, this person sounds like somebody who was very worried about the end of time, which I think was a popular thing at the time, and wrote all this down to express that fear. What I really like about Revelation is what Michael Hardin said about it a few years ago when he was on The Place. Was it with Aaron Ra? When he was on the show, he asked, why is the weirdest book of the Bible the cornerstone of the theology? And I think Michael actually up-liked that one when I put that there. Yeah, it's the writer seems to have been, I'm afraid of all of this. And here is what I saw in my fever dream, the fever dream inspired by my fear. And I don't know if he meant very much more than that, but he seems to have been taken to mean a lot more.
The canonizers, the church canonizers, they cherry picked. They cherry picked some books and they sold it to the church as, let's say, an encyclopedia of harmony. And when I was in church, I bought into that. When I learned how to read the languages, those particular languages, I said, I don't think I've ever been lied to as much as I have been by church people. And so, I find it very interesting. All of these books are saying various things, different things, and it really has very little to do with church doctrine. What are your thoughts on that, Daryl?
Well, I guess if you want to talk about the book of Revelation, the problem that I see with it these days is what people do with it more than anything else. I mean, they just take it in its English form and, just let their imagination run wild. And that would be okay if it was just a movie or a video game, but, it's supposed to be some sort of warning or revelation of future events and that sort of thing. And, I think a lot of people have suffered as a result of that kind of thinking. That's pretty much my position. I don't know if that does much for the question of, why people would disparage it or why they would embrace it, either one. I guess it's your perception goes back to that thing of perspective. If your perspective is that it's God's word, you need to try to figure it out somehow or another, I guess, believe something about it. But if you just see it as something someone wrote and you don't know for what reason, I don't think I would try to take it very far.
I agree.
Well, didn't Revelation almost not make it into the canon?
The book of Revelation came close to not being a part of the canon, as did many other books. But
I think
here's,
John was contested also.
well, here's the thing that bothers me. It's not so much what did or did not make it into the canon, it's what they did with the canon. They
Well,
sold
yeah, that's
the
where I was headed.
Yeah, they sold the canon as if all of these authors were writing X, Y, and Z in harmony, and nothing could be further from the truth. When you read the entire Abjad, that is the Old Testament writings, what we see in them, we see people who are extremely agnostic. Some people are polytheistic, some people are not. It's all over the place. The church has never admitted to that. There is such dishonesty when it comes to textual criticism, both higher and lower forms of textual criticism in the church. I was asking some Catholics the other day, I said, one of the things that I don't like about Catholicism is the kind of dishonesty in so many ways. I said, for instance, most people are not aware of this. If you've never dealt with manuscripts, and I have. In fact, I was working with the translation team on palimpsest, which is actually something that they disregarded what was written in Greek and they tried to erase it and tried to write sermon notes. And so my job was to lift some things out to do some translate. But to make a long story short, when one tries to get a hold of let's say, the documents that the Catholic Church, quote unquote, has, the argument has been made by Protestants. And we need to keep in mind that the Protestants don't consider themselves not Catholic. Catholic is a term that simply means universal. You're never going to meet a Southern Baptist that doesn't believe that his church isn't the universal church of Jesus Christ or the ecclesia of Christ. And so the word Catholic became used over and over again by those people who kept saying, you guys are protesting the church, therefore we're going to call you Protestants, and we hope that label sticks with you. And they became known as the Reformers. Martin Luther was a reformer. You had others like Calvin and so many others trying to reform. Now, what does that Reformation mean? And this is something that we need to applaud. A lot of people put down 50,000 denominations within the Protestant movement, but here's the plus point. What took place with the Catholic Church? You had priests. Would they get married? Did they have the right to get married, to love someone and spend the rest of their life with them? No. The nuns, were they allowed to get married? No. And so what happened within the Protestant movement, that is those protesting the Catholic Church, not to claim that they were not Catholic, but to protest what was happening within, they, in a sense, said, we feel good enough to say to ourselves, we're not going to stay as we've been. We're going to keep moving forward. And they started getting married. And that's a plus point. Would you agree with that, Daryl?
Sure, it's much better than what we find goes on actually within a lot of Catholicism these days.
Right. I mean, can you imagine all of these guys and ladies? They're never, they can't have relationships with anyone. Not
Yeah, I
in
don't see
the
anything
intimate
right about
sense.
that.
Does that make sense to you, Diana?
Oh man, it does. I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, and I look back on that, and I have to wonder why a priest or a sister is not allowed to have that sort of intimate relationship with another person, and intimate, that's sexual, yes, and beyond that, when that is a fundamental human property need, whatever you want to call it. I have to wonder if a lot of the scandal within the church stems, at least in part, from that deprivation.
I would agree.
Right.
where these folks just can't have an outlet for what's natural. I have to wonder.
So actually what you're saying, you're giving a thumbs up for what the Protestants did in that sense, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, they didn't only move them a bit forward when it came to relations. In other words, they opened the door to, hey, if you're a minister, you're just a regular guy or a woman. And so all of a sudden in the Protestant church, you started, and they were still, Protestants refer to themselves as Catholic. And that needs to be understood. However, the Roman Catholic Church, they want to own the word. They don't want anyone else to use that word. However, Protestants are not that offended by it simply because, they're making more over a term than what's there. And so they let go of the notion of having to be so obsessed like the Roman Catholics have been and have remained. And so people became pastors, leaders of churches that were not just men, but now we have women. That's a huge plus point, correct?
Yeah.
And now we
I
even have
I have no idea
gays
why the
and
Catholic Church would
lesbians.
want to exclude half the population from some of the, what do you want to call it, ministerial work.
Right. Now we even have gays and lesbians in the ministry in many of these ecumenical movements. And see, the reason I bring this up has to do with Mr. Graham. I have a lot of respect for him. I didn't like his preaching of you need to give your life and heart to Jesus Christ and all of that. But one of the things that I did respect about him in his latter years, he seemed to let go of that notion. And so it was no longer about Jesus Christ and him crucified. It was that we needed some kind of human being to suggest that God was a compassionist instead of one who was here to condemn us. And so he became, in a sense, a universalist who believed that all people would eventually wind up with the Father. And so his mind changed much in every way. Unfortunately, his son, he's become a fundamentalist, which is sad. Franklin Graham.
Very sad.
Yeah, it's a sad case. One goes forward, the other one goes backward. But I don't know. To me, and the thing that I disagreed with Billy Graham in, he was very non-denominational, and I like denominations in this sense. I like the fact that you can have 50,000 different ways of looking at the same text. I love that, simply because we live on this little round ball called Earth, and we have different viewpoints. And if we can learn how to get along with different viewpoints and accept one another, we can be pluralistic. And I think a pluralistic community it's a bit more adaptive, less maladaptive than one that's just ecumenical in the sense that everyone has to be of the same faith, and we just pretend to have everything in agreement. Would you somewhat lean in my direction on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, as when I was a couple of years ago when I was reading The Amazing Colossal Apostle, Robert Price, there were some things that he mentioned there where I got the idea that the orthodoxy was not so much about theology as it was about government, where you have to hold these particular tenets because we want you to behave in a certain way. And these tenets are supposedly the basis of the way we want you to behave. So you have to believe all of that. Where was it the Gnostics, or what term would you use for these people who believed in personal revelation? And anybody could say, I had a revelation and it is in direct opposition to you. So now you have tension.
Right.
And the people who settled on the orthodoxy did not want that tension.
Right. you know, when you
And I
brought
have
up
to wonder,
Gnostics, I mean, we had the Gnostics and the agnostics, and some people believe that, you know, Huxley invented this agnostic issue. Been around a long, long time. Oh, this has been a lot of fun, you know, just chatting a bit tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming
love
on.
this stuff.
Daryl, I've got a couple of questions for you before we end the program. We've been talking a lot about faith. You seem to have a lot of faith when you do business. You're a painter, a contractor. You're not always signing contracts. Is that true?
I have a ridiculous amount of faith when it comes to that. I trust people all day long. And you know what? I've been doing this since 90, 91, something like that. And I can count on one hand the contracts that I've signed or required people to sign. And I think I've had about 2 times where someone has actually done me wrong, and that wasn't even in a major way. I think people are more prone to this than they are not. But it's having faith in one another, you know. And I didn't realize that's what I was doing a lot of the time. I used to think that I was just trusting God, but you know, I never really saw him or knew that he was involved in these transactions. But I tell you what, I know a lot of people that it gave me a lot of confidence in just trusting people. And I like it. It's a good way to live. Works
So-
well.
Yay.
So it sounds like you've been trusting humanity for a long, long time, and they haven't disappointed you that much. However, from time to time they do, but it's worked for you, correct?
Correct. And you know, could be there's a God behind it. I don't know, but doesn't really matter that much to me. You know, I know there's something innately good about human beings, and I love finding it. I love discovering it and building relationships. So, like I said, it's a wonderful way to live. And like I say, if there's a God orchestrating it somehow or another, that's fine. But whether that's the case or not, doesn't matter. You know, I just found something that's good about humanity, and I think if we tap into it more, we would discover that it could go a lot farther than it has.
Now, you and
I
your
think
wife.
we
Go ahead.
messed it up to a great degree, you know.
Now, you and your wife are guilty of always looking for the good in people. I mean, how did that come about?
Well, in all honesty, I can't say. I guess maybe it's because of what we've discovered in each other, and it's just gone from there. I don't know. But you know, even when you're let down, you know, like if someone doesn't follow through the way that you would like for them to, or whatever, it's easy to make excuses for people, you know, because you know people have been burned so much. You know, it's not everybody's honest, and not everybody's gotten a fair shake, and people who've not had good experiences don't necessarily know how to trust and how to you know, do things in an honest way. But I've watched people learn that. I've watched people change their position from one who doesn't trust or that will try to take advantage of a situation to one who becomes a trusting person and one who can be trusted. It takes time and it takes some effort and it takes some, let me just throw this word out there, faith.
Faith. Okay. That's not a bad word.
It's really not.
It's not a bad word. Diane, a last question, and then we're going to the
Yes, sir.
house. How can we help people who find themselves, and I call it trapped, in this notion of epistemicism? I mean, because it's not about science. It's not the way that philosophers are measuring out philosophy, or cognitive scientists are dealing with belief or faith or anything like that. I mean, this is well outside of the context of science and reasoning. And so, why is that so interesting? Why are so many people buying into that?
Well, as I say, I have a feeling that the crime motive of the epistivist movement is that misapplication of the term faith to what certain preachers, televangelists want people to do, as in accept what I am saying simply because I am saying it. And I said before, I don't think that's faith at all. And I think maybe if we can get a more general understanding of that process, that misapplication process, and make it understood that this is the bad thing, that faith itself is not necessarily all that bad. As Ozzy and Stephen and you have said previously, faith is simply a position we come from when we accept certain things for good reasons. It is I don't know, I'm getting a little confused on that one here, but
I mean,
faith itself is not a horrible thing. It's that misapplication of faith
but
that we
isn't it,
have to oppose.
but isn't it true that all of us are not all that measured in everything? I mean, isn't it true that sometimes we trust, we rely, we have faith in things for reasons, but not for good reasons? I mean, sometimes we just mess up, don't we?
Yeah, well, I would substitute, when you say not for good reasons, I'll substitute not for formal reasons.
Correct.
The reasons themselves may be good, but it would be difficult to formalize them. Yeah, we can accept that, and I think we should. And faith in that sense is not only not a bad thing, I think it's a good thing.
Right.
But I think if we can come to the point where we understand and can make clear that we're opposing a certain misuse,
Right.
then maybe that would be a little bit better.
Right.
And here's why we oppose that. Here is how it is misused.
But this thing didn't stop just with a pushback on fundies. This thing
Yeah.
became optivism. Do you see where I'm going with this? I mean, it's like people wanted to take it way, way, way too far. And that's the thing that scares me. I don't really see anything different in that narrative of atheism than what I see in the fundamentalism of Eric Coven and Cy Ten Bruggencate. I don't see the difference.
And I agree. There's really no difference there at all. I think it's that all or nothing tendency that we humans have, where it's a lot more work to look at the various nuances, the various shades of gray or whatever color you happen to be using at the time. It's a lot more work to do that than it is to say, I'm just throwing it all out. And I guess we've got to be a little more willing to do that work, to really just look at the degrees as well as the statement itself.
I guess my next question would probably bring up hours of talk, but when atheists tell me that it's just lack of belief, I can't buy that. For instance, when it comes to the question, God or not God, when people form an opinion on the question, that's just not an issue of belief or lack of. If a person says, I believe God, or they may go so far as to add the word exist. Another person says, well, I lack belief. Well, simply because you're willing to form an opinion on the question means that you've moved beyond suspending judgment, correct?
Yeah, I think that is the case.
And so this is
Which-
why I really have a lot of problems with if they are not using it in a multi-axial sense. If people don't use agnostic atheism in a multi-axial sense, if they claim to be an agnostic atheist, that's like saying, I'm suspending judgment, but not really. And when a person says I'm an agnostic theist, it's like saying I'm suspending judgment, but not really. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it really does.
I mean, what are we
Because-
doing, playing games? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, even the suspense of, even when I say that I'm suspending judgment, it doesn't mean that I'm suspending judgment. It means that I'm trying to practice this discipline well enough to say that if I say A plus B equals C, when I have nothing, I have no reason to form an opinion on A at this time. But people are forming an opinion on A as A and goat or not goat. And in this sense, when it comes to the question of God, people are forming an opinion, God or not God. That willingness to form that opinion is very much a doxastic issue, correct?
Yeah, and that brings to mind a comment that Stephen made to me when I was posting on this particular thing, claims and metaclaims, where the claim, I believe there is no God, would be the claim, or let me try that again. The claim, I believe there is a God, is a claim. And then there's the claim, well, I don't necessarily believe your claim. There's the metaclaim. And I think we have a tendency to collapse that onto one level. It's, we're not looking at evaluating the claim over what is being claimed. And that tends to lead to confusion. And I
Right.
may have just
Right.
been confused right there, so.
Right, and these days we see lots of people taking this route, that is to the question. They will say, I'm agnostic, but implicitly I'm an atheist. So some are claiming I'm an implicit atheist or an explicit atheist and yah. Some people are claiming agnostic, but implicit theist or, and so on. I think that at the end of the day, we're going to have to back up a bit and talk about what it means to be multi-axial. And when we use these terms to modify, that's a much different world than what Bob Graves is saying. Because what Bob is saying when he says he's this agnostic theist, he's not saying the same thing. He's not using the word to modify the other. Most people don't get that, and this is why linguistic raising and all of that is something that we need to talk about, and linguistic control and lowering and all of that is maybe a complicated thing, but we'll get into it. This is done in formal logic and all that, by the way, but we'll get into it at a later time. But I don't know, it's been fun talking to both of you guys. You guys are very relaxed, and you're not parking your minds on a dot. You're not parking your minds as if, you have to stay where you were yesterday. Why is that, Daryl?
Well, you know what? I've discovered I like changing my mind, not just for the sake of changing my mind, but it's something that you realize at some point in your life, and some people may never realize it, that it's a privilege. It's a privilege actually to realize you're not stuck, that you can move forward, that you can hear something and end up disagreeing with yourself. I mean, I think that's the real issue. I used to be in full agreement with myself, but I disagree with myself all the time now because I've been wrong so much, and it's nice to be able to realize, this just don't work anymore and move on to something better.
Let me
And what's
ask you-
great about being wrong is that when you're wrong, there's an opportunity to learn something.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're always right, or at least you think you're always right, you don't learn anything. You just stagnate. That's not very good. Stagnant ponds become smelly. So
Okay.
Yeah, I try not to stink anymore.
Okay, I'm going to put this question out there. I'm going to call some people out, not like other people do, because I'm not this unkind person who wants to throw someone under the bus. I'm not wanting to do that. But when it comes to theism and atheism, I see nothing compelling either way. And I think if we would think about what it means to suspend judgment, I don't think that we would be willing to park our ideas in either ism. I think that we would hold back a bit and say, yeah, I don't know. We don't have anything compelling either way. And I think that it would, in a sense, end the debate and get us more focused on method and process and on science and how we can work together. And so if you feel like you have something compelling in the theistic camp, I would like for you to come on this show, because I haven't heard anything compelling when it comes to theism. And if you have anything compelling when it comes to atheism, I would like to hear that, because I've never had an atheist on this show who had anything compelling to offer when it comes to that particular ism. Nothing. And so both, in my opinion, are not worth, parking your mind in, or, wearing this big red A t-shirt or a big cross on your t-shirt. I just see no sense in either one of them. I think both are, in a sense, just making a fool out of humanity. I think they're very foolish. In fact, the free thinkers here in Pensacola, they remind me of fundamentalists. They almost remind me of people from the Jim Jones movement. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, some of the things that they do is just absurd. They do everything they can to disparage people who find themselves in theism, and people here in Pensacola who are theists are trying to disparage the atheists. And to me, a free thinker needs to be someone who's willing to say, yeah, listen, I can suspend judgment when I don't have anything. And so if we don't have anything concerning this issue of God, we can't even define God well, that is, without cartoon type lexical work. What are we doing? And so I would like to challenge you, if you know of someone who's this person who has an argument concerning theism or atheism, explicit or implicit, please have them contact me, because I will give them an ear and I will give them a lot of respect, because that's what we do here at the place. And so thanks for your time. Daryl, would you end the show for us with a song or something? I mean, you have that amazing voice. I don't.
It's always good to have Diana on the show.
It is.
Miss Diana. So,
oh, danke schön.
sure. So, anyway, look forward to the next one.
Sounds good. This has been a lot of fun. And so I think we're going to end the show. And it's not that exciting without an intro or an outro. And we did this on purpose tonight, just to be boring. So hopefully we were real boring. Isn't that true, Diana?
Oh, you're never boring. Come on. Yeah, you talk about beliefs. I have a belief. I believe you're a big sweetie. Okay.
Well, thank you. You know, one of the things that I don't want to be an entertainer. I fight against that. So many people want me to do this and that. Oh, your show would have so many more viewers if you were more entertaining. And I said, not interested. I would like to have a lot of viewers in the sense so we could work together and build a more, let's say, a better world for social purposes, social goods, and, trying to up the game of humanism and all of that. That's what I'm interested in. And so we need some help, guys. Goodbye.